Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Masalela family, Umagogo, Mutongo, or if I may call you Umantani. Thank you for the enormous privilege to be here this evening. I'm not a professor. I'm not clever enough for that. My friends who are real professors at university will be horrified if they hear I'm called a professor. Let me just share a few thoughts about this book. And obviously it's my thoughts. It's the way I experience the book. You will read the same book and you will come to different and other conclusions. But the first thing I want to share with you is what struck me most in this book. It's a book that tells us about war. It's a book that tells us about betrayal. It's a book that tells us about enormous pain and suffering. It's also a book that tells us about incredible humanity and civility. And of all these things, what is the one thing that struck me most? It is that part where Elias describes that his father and mother decided to leave South Africa and go to Swaziland and begin a new life there, establish the family there. Why? To ensure a better education for their children. That is the part that really struck me. And it brought home to me the sacred trust that we all carry to think not just for ourselves, but for our children. And to do not just for us, but for the next generation. It is something that really, really struck me almost in the first chapter of the book. What are the main themes of the book? And two of them stand out for me. And again, that is what I saw in the book. You will have your own experience of the book. But the first one that stood out for me was the fact that there was English is my third language, I'm sorry. There were a group of people who put themselves always second, who put other ideals and higher ideals, who put the society and the community first. That is the one thing that really comes through in the book time and time and time and again. It's a constant theme. It starts with the parents who uproot themselves here, who go to Swaziland at a much lower wage, much lower income, for the sake of the children. That's one example. It's not the only example. You know, we live in a time where it is almost a sin to be patriotic. It's almost a sin to be loyal to your country. It's old-fashioned. People almost dismiss it. What for me was fantastic, and this is the one theme that came out, what for me was fantastic was that you can still be loyal and patriotic to ideals bigger than yourself. The second theme that came out was the enormous civility. Elias was ANC, his brother Lucky PAC. It created an enormous tension between them. And the tension is described in the book. One of the most moving passages is where Elias described how he went to New York on a visit, and Lucky at that stage was living in New York, and the difficulty that they had to relate as two brothers because of these political differences between them. But, and this is where the civility and the humanity comes in, they actually transcended that. They actually transcended that. And not just the two of them, but the whole family, and also the family in the community in which they lived. ANC, PAC, it really did not matter. You're lucky to be in such a family. The second example of that civility comes from the relationship between Elias and Onshantla, who, when they were dating, and Elias was trying his best to sort of catch her, you must admit it was a lapse of good judgment. One of the Swaziland police officers who regularly raided number 43 was actually a member of her family. And he and the rest of her family put enormous pressure on her not to have this relationship with Elias. He was called a terrorist, and they saw him as somebody that she should not have a relationship with him. She kept that from Elias for many, many years. She never told him. She carried on with the relationship. Their love blossomed, formed a family, and she kept that information from him. if that is not the ultimate in sacrifice and in love, in civility, then what is it? That's the second example that really struck me. So the book on me had this enormous impression that we're dealing here with people who've overcome their circumstances, who've risen widely above their circumstances, and in that process helped to create a much, much better world. And that is why it is important that this book is written, that it's published, and that you buy it and read it. It is becoming part of the bigger South African history story. And the more we can capture these stories and tell them to one another, the better we're helping to build our society. Can I lastly conclude with the writer? In reading the book, I heard Elias. Those of you who know him will know that every word in a sentence has a function. He doesn't just use words. And it's the same in the book. Every sentence is functional. Every word in those sentences absolutely chosen, and they fit. The book reads like a breeze for that reason. It's clear, it's succinct, and it's very much like Elias. There is a clarity of thought and expression that is so often missing, also from the debate in economics. But he has given it in this book. And it was a pleasure for me to read it. It was a privilege for me to internalize it. And I feel myself hugely humbled that I can be here, but also that I can have this insight into the story of a remarkable family and a remarkable group of people. Thank you for what you've done.